we have yet another case where more awful police officers would coerce a confession out of an innocent person. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Rhonda Johnson and Sharon Shaw. Viewer discretion is advised. This case occurred in the area of Webster, Texas, back in 1971. It sounds like Webster, at least back then, was a really small little community where kind of everyone knew everyone sort of thing. And living in that community were two best friends. Rhonda Johnson was born on December 16th, 1956. And at the time this case occurs, she is 14 years old. Her best friend was 13-year-old Sharon Shaw. Sharon was born on August 11th, 1957. Sharon was actually born in Alabama, and Rhonda was born in Texas. It was August 4th, 1971. The two teenage girls, best friends, were kind of out and about just hanging out around Webster, Texas. Witness reports would state that the two girls were spotted at Galveston Beach. It was, a nice summer day. It was warm, and what kids don't like going to the beach. It was actually going to be a week before Sharon's 14th birthday, and she was really excited for it. But sadly, that birthday never came for her. Now, they had been seen, I guess, the last time anyone can recall seeing the two girls, they were walking along Seawall Boulevard near Galveston Beach. Some reports would state that they saw the girls possibly interacting with someone who drove up in a car, but then the car drove away and the girls were still outside and they were just kind of continuing to walk. But there really was no other sightings of them after that. So the girls would be reported missing pretty quickly. Obviously, these are two, 13, 14-year-old kids who had they'd never run away from home before. They didn't have a history of, not coming home on time. So this was obviously very unusual. And unfortunately, they searched and searched for them, but they did not come up with anything. They had the help of the entire community, the family, friends, police, obviously are all out there looking for these two girls, but they just had no luck. But the sad and unfortunate truth about what happened to the two girls would finally surface on January 3rd, 1972. Two young boys were out on Clear Lake, I guess at Taylor Bayou near Webster, Texas. They were out on their boat when they were kind of right in the middle of the lake. They saw what they thought was like a white ball. So they reached in to grab the ball, and then when the kid turned it around, he realized this was a human skull. And so they immediately go ashore and they immediately get police. It was obvious to the coroner that this was the skull of a young person, possibly a female, but without any other bones, they weren't 100% positive. But they began to search, and they had this big grid search kind of going to look for the rest of the remains if they were anywhere. They searched through the rest of the water, and eventually in this open field somewhat nearby where the skull was found, more skeletal remains were discovered. And now they actually had the remains of not one person, but two. Both were young females. Next to the bodies, there was clothing. There was a cross that Sharon Shaw wore, and they would eventually get the dental records for both girls, and they were able to link up to both skulls they found and can confirm that the remains they found were Rhonda Johnson and Sharon Shaw. Their cause of death was not, they weren't able to really totally figure out what it was. And that's obviously because they were both skeletonized at the time. There were no fractures. There were no obvious gunshot wounds. They could have been asphyxiated. It's just, they really couldn't say for sure. However, they do know that these were homicides. A few months go by and police get a tip of a 23-year-old gas station attendant named Michael Lloyd Self. There was a lot of pressure to get this case immediately solved and wrapped up because Rhonda's grandfather was a prominent city council member in the area. By the time Michael Self is given, before his name is given to police, a few months before that, the Webster police hired two new people, and their names were Don Morris and Tommy Deal. They actually had come from the traffic division of the Texas Department of Public Safety. Now, I'm showing you some mugshots of the two of them right here, but just so you know, I'll talk about that later. But these are the two men in question. A little while after they are brought in is when they get the tip about Michael Lloyd's self. And so they bring Michael in. He willingly offers to come in. It's also something to note that Michael Lloyd's self at that time had a very, very low IQ. He did not completely understand everything that was happening, which, as I'm sure you all know who watch a lot of true crime stories know that that's a great recipe for police who want to pin something on someone quickly. So at the police station, they show him the photos of both girls. It's like, ask him, do you know these two girls? He's like, I know of them because they're in the news, but I don't actually know them. Like, I've never met them before. And they told Michael, like, listen, we know you're a registered sex offender, because he was, and this was mainly due to peeping Tom incidences. I don't know if those were if those peeping Tom things were against young girls or not, or if they were adult women. I don't know. Either way, it doesn't matter. It's both terrible. And so it kind of sounded like they were trying to use that as like a weapon against him. Like, we know this about your past, and well, these two girls, But he said to them, I have nothing to do with whatever happened to these girls. I don't know what happened to them. It's not me. I'm innocent. I didn't do it. And right then and there, they arrest him. They say, all right, we are arresting you and we're charging you with the murder of Rhonda Johnson and Sharon Shaw. And so these two new hires, these two new detective police officers, they're the ones conducting the actual interrogation of Michael's self. There is another officer named Jerry Mitchell who had popped into the interrogation room for a few moments to kind of just observe. He said at that point, Michael's self looked very calm and relaxed in the chair. He did not seem to be nervous or scared or anything. But once Mitchell left the room, everything changed. The officers, they berated him and they told him, we know you did something to them. We know you killed these two girls. He's like, no, I didn't. They're like, we have evidence against you. They didn't. They had no evidence against him. And they told him, you're not leaving this room until you confess. And still he's like, I am not confessing. I did not do it. I had nothing to do with this. What else do you want me to say? Well, you need to confess. Do it now, or else we're going to be here all night. At one point, Officer Morris takes Michael by his collar, slams him against a wall, takes his nightstick and begins to jab him in the chest and the stomach with it, like seriously hurting him. Then Morris took out 5 bullets from his gun, and he, right in front of Michael, put those bullets one after another, standing upright on the table, basically insinuating he was going to take those bullets and he was going to shoot Michael. He threatened him, I'm going to kill you if you don't confess. And Michael was terrified. He's like, what do I do? Like, I didn't do this, but I also don't want to get shot. I don't want to get hurt more. And so after that threat of being, threatened that we're going to shoot you if you don't confess, Michael said, fine, okay, I'll confess. Again, not totally understanding what was actually happening here. About an hour after Officer Mitchell had left the interrogation room, he comes back, an hour later. Now he sees Michael's self. He's like sweating. He appears to be really scared and nervous. He's shaking. He appears to be like just completely distraught. He was a completely different person than what he saw just an hour prior. So now these two other officers, because Mitchell leaves again, these two new officers who have been doing this interrogation, they give him a piece of paper and they say, write down what we tell you to say. They're actually telling him what to write. But they also needed him to include things in the confession that came from him. And he was giving details about the murders of these two young girls. However, those details weren't matching whatsoever with the crime scene. He wrote down, I dumped the bodies in the water at El Largo, and that's 20 miles away from where the bodies were actually found. He says that he strangled them to death with his hand, but the coroner report would later state that that's not possible because there would have been breaks or fractures on their throats. There were none whatsoever to indicate that they had been strangled. In this confession, he also states that he drove directly to Sharon Shaw's house and picked up the girls. However, Sharon's parents say that's not at all what happened. The two girls left the house like they were out on their own. No one came to our house to pick them up. And then in the confession, he also stated that after he had abducted them and put them in his car, they had rolled down the windows and they were screaming and hollering for help and saying, I've been kidnapped, and saying all these like terrifying things for anyone to help. And there were cars nearby, but police have zero reports of anyone reporting two girls screaming for help outside of a car. And he said that this happened early in the day, when that also contradicts witness testimony that said they saw the two girls as late as 9 p.m., which would have put them on their own way after he's confessing he's already abducted them. 3 days goes by after this confession, and he takes a polygraph test. He goes against his lawyer and does it. This time he changes his confession. Now he's saying he hit Rhonda with a Coke bottle. Again, there's no evidence to show or prove that. And then he dumped him in the bayou. But at this point, he now knows they were dumped in the bayou. But they were completely contradictory with his first confession. Then, for whatever reason, these officers take him, put him in a police car, and drive him to the areas like the crime scenes, like where the skull was found and where the bodies were found, where they were last seen. They have Michael stand on his own, and they take photos of him. And these two officers claimed that this is now a third confession by him taking photos that they're making him take at the crime scene areas. That's a confession. And then he also states at one point in one of his confessions, I forgot to mention this earlier, but he states that he had taken the girls' clothes and thrown them out the car window somewhere completely different than where the bodies were dumped. They also knew that wasn't true because their clothing was found next to their bodies. They had no physical evidence connecting him to the case. So now this is 1971. DNA wasn't even close to being a thing yet. But they didn't have like fingerprints. They didn't have any fibers. They didn't have any strands of hair. They searched his vehicles. They didn't have any physical evidence. All they had was this so-called confession. Well, two confessions. Well, technically, if you're asking the police there, 3 confessions. Now, when his attorney found out about this third confession with these photos, the attorney's like, that's not a confession, and that's actually kind of illegal. While awaiting his trial, because at this point he's now charged with the homicides, another officer, Dave Coburn, comes in to talk to Michael Self in his jail cell. That's when Michael Self, tells him how the confession went. All the things he went through, being thrown against the wall, being poked with the nightstick and the bullets and all of that, and them telling him what to say for the most part. And the thing about that is, it was Dave Coburn, when Michael Self told him about the bullets being placed on the table, with the threat of being shot if he doesn't confess. Well, Coburn says, well, that's actually interesting because he, Dave Coburn, had seen Officer Morris do that exact same thing before in a completely different case. He literally witnessed it with his own eyes. So he knows Michael is telling the truth about that, which means he's likely telling the truth about the other abuse that he went through. However, the defense did not know about this. They didn't know, they weren't told that Dave Coburn had seen this before. And so he was never called as a witness at Michael's trial. On May 15th, 1973, Michael's trial ends. He is found guilty of both murders, despite there being no physical evidence, despite these confessions being so completely bizarre and bad. That was apparently all what the jury needed. And so he was sentenced to life in prison. A couple more years go by, and this is where the mugshots of the 2 police officers come in. Morris and Deal, the 2 officers who did this entire interrogation and arrest, well, they had been arrested and convicted of burglary. They robbed a bank. 2 officers robbed a bank while they were still officers. They were actually part of a large robbery group that they had started before this whole ordeal with Michael Self even happened. Morris was sentenced to 55 years in prison. Deal was sentenced to 35 years in prison, but both of them would be paroled eventually. But Deal was later rearrested for more robbery charges, and he went back to prison. So Michael Self's attorneys are, they get this information like, these are bad dudes. We need a new trial. Like, this is insane. Like, these are 2 clear criminals led this awful interrogation, and so we need them, we need this whole thing to be redone. Well, the courts disagreed. They said, no, that's not proof that Michael Self didn't kill these girls. It's proof that they're not very good officers. That's not proof that he didn't do the crime. Well, then in April of 1980, a man walks into the police station there in a Texas police station. He confesses he was the one who killed Rhonda and Sharon. Now, his confession wasn't exactly super detailed. However, he mentioned one thing. He said he used a cord to tie both the girls' bodies, which up until this point, literally nobody knew that other than the killers and the police. Even Michael Self never mentioned a cord at all in the confession. And that information was withheld from everybody, so that was a big, big thing. This man came in to confess and mentioned that. This same man, he actually knew Rhonda and Sharon. He knew them because he lived in the exact same apartment complex that one of them lived in. He saw them every day. But despite this man's confession, despite the fact that the officers Morris and Deal were scumbags, criminals themselves, who clearly forced a confession out of someone, despite all of it, the courts were like, nah, we're good. We're going to go ahead and still say that Michael is guilty. So Michael is saying he's innocent. His attorney is obviously saying he's innocent. That this officer Coburn, who works for the Texas, police departments in Texas, he's saying he's innocent. He likely didn't do this, but nobody is listening. The courts are just as bad at that point as those two officers, because they have a duty to get the actual person, to get the actual justice for these two innocent murdered children and their families. But the courts and the police are like, it's just so much easier to say we got the guy. But here's the thing. You don't have the guy. That guy is out there possibly harming more people, more children, and that seems to be okay with them. Like, well, but this case is wrapped up nice. But is it? In 2000, Michael Lloyd Self died in prison from cancer, never being exonerated, never being declared not guilty, never having to face a retrial. He died in a prison cell, quite possibly a third victim in this case. And now they are saying, maybe Michael Self wasn't guilty of this at all. There was a serial killer going around named Edward Harold Bell. He had been convicted of murder by the time Michael died in prison, but Edward Bell, after Michael's death, confessed that he was the one who killed Rhonda and Sharon, along with many, many other innocent victims, because he was a serial killer. He gave details about their deaths, again, that nobody else should have known, and he fit the bill. They were kind of the type of victims he would go after. The two girls fell right into that. He was in the area when it all happened. It's more than likely him. However, in 2019, he died in prison, never being convicted of the murders of Rhonda and Sharon, because charges were never laid against him because, well, we got the guy and he died in prison, so that's it. It's over with. Yay! We're the heroes, except you're not. Time and time again, I've told stories like this where police, they just want to get an easy victory. That's all they care about. They care about the W. That's it. And how fast can we do it? It's not about getting justice, because if it's about getting justice, you would do your due diligence. You would really dig into this case, in all cases like this. You would look at this confession, these multiple confessions that were always different. The fact that you have testimony from another officer who stated that the whole bullet thing is something he witnessed this other officer do before, but nobody wanted to listen. These two officers are scumbags, had no business being in any police force, but they were allowed to interrogate this man with a low IQ who did not really fully understand exactly what he was doing or where he was and what was going to happen. He was berated, he was abused, he was threatened to be murdered. It's like, what are the qualifications? What are the qualifications to be a detective? To be a homicide detective or a missing persons detective? What do you have to do in order to become that? Because it sure seems like it's nothing. There's like, who do you know? Okay, you do this. Now, obviously, I'm not saying this for all, modern day detectives and all that. I know it's gotten a lot better, but it hasn't fully gotten better. It's been, this has been happening for decades and decades, where it's just, let's just get the easy answer, even if it's not the right answer. If it's the wrong one, whatever. We just need someone in prison to make the family happy, to give them justice, to give them closure. But now it's like the family can look at this and go, well, shit, did you get the right person? Is my daughter's killer still out there? Like, what's going on? I'm not going to sit here and say that Rhonda and Sharon got justice, because I don't think they did. I think a man was wrongfully convicted of this case. This is just my opinion. But based on the fact there's no physical evidence, the confessions were always different. Witnesses would place the two girls way outside of Michael Self's, presence after he said he was with them. It's cut and dry. This is such an obvious coerced confession. And he dies in prison himself. And if he was innocent, he died a victim. He died a victim of injustice. I mean, I know he's not exactly a great guy. He was a peeping Tom, and he had, he was a, registered sex offender. I get he's not a wonderful dude, but he is innocent more than likely of these two murders. And regardless of the things he's done, in the past, we can't just say, well, he did do those things, so let's just say he murdered these two girls. Because don't look at it from the perspective of him. Look at it from the perspective of the loved ones of these two girls who thought they got justice. But did they? Now they have that question always lingering forever. And that's not fair to them. It's more unfair to them than it is to say maybe Michael Self. And so, really, in the end, I will pose it as a question. Do you think Rhonda Johnson and Sharon Shaw got the justice they rightfully deserved? But that is it for this case. True crime, a Rooney, Dooney, Dingleberry Dongs. I hope you found it interesting. As usual, hello, my name is Mike. If you are new here, I tell true crime stories here on YouTube multiple times a week, so please subscribe. Hit the bell so you're notified of when I post. Leave a like, a comment down below. It helps more people see it. Share the videos if you like to. Please watch the videos all the way through if you could. It helps a lot. Recommend me to your family and friends and whatnot. I also tell short form true crime stories over on TikTok. My TikTok is in the link tree below in the description of this video. So feel free to follow the TikTok if you want to, but I do post compilation videos from my TikTok videos from the month at the beginning of every month, when they're usually like several hours long. Also in that link tree, you're going to find my case list. It's almost 7,000 names long. I typically choose my cases that I cover at random. However, if you are a loved one for a person who has been murdered or is missing and there maybe is no justice yet, or whatever the case may be, if you want me to cover your loved one's story, just let me know that you are a loved one. That way I can make sure it's a higher priority, because otherwise I just pick cases at random. But you can email me. My email is listed below if you want to recommend a case, just the name of the case, where it happened, and when it happened if you know, and then I'll add it to the list, and eventually I'll cover it. But with that being said, that is it for this video, True Crime, a Rooney. So until the next case, ta-ta for now.